I'm happy that somebody wants to hire me as Kevin Stewart, but you're not hiring me as Kevin Stewart with Briggs Veselka. You're hiring the CAS team, and the team is going to support you. So somebody stepping into it, it's moving beyond the mindset of me as an individual, I have to do this. It's setting up the processes, setting up systems, processes, controls, so that you can support and advise.
Welcome to the AI in Accounting podcast, which helps accounting, bookkeeping, and finance professionals prepare for the future of outsourced accounting and accounting technology. Plus, you'll learn how to use artificial intelligence, AI, automation, and machine learning to scale your accounting practice. Now, here's your host, Joshua Feinberg of Vic.ai.
Hey, it's Joshua Feinberg here from the AI and Accounting podcast, and I'm thrilled today to be joined by a very special guest. I have with me today Kevin Stewart from Briggs Veselka in Houston. Kevin is the principal and practice leader of the firm's client accounting services group. Thanks so much for joining me today, Kevin.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invite. I'm excited about today.
I am as well. It's interesting. What originally attracted me to your background is you've been putting out a lot of really great content lately on cash flow, liquidity, resiliency, what it takes to successfully navigate the current climate. I saw you did a webinar specific to the hotels industry and cash position. But where I usually like to start out with these interviews is to get a feel for your background, how you got to where you are in your career journey, your role within your firm, and where you kind of see all of this heading. But I know you have a lot of great experience, a mixture of both public accounting and in private industry, especially in retail. So
Sure.
Yeah, give us a little bit of background.
Absolutely. My background, I talk about myself. I'm a CPA, I'm an accountant, but I'm not a normal CPA and accountant. And I think my experience kind of speaks to that. Although I started Big Four and I was on the audit side, and I did that for, I think, about 6 years at PwC and then a year at Grant Thornton before I transitioned to Walmart. Since that time, the majority of my experience has been around broken processes, broken systems. So I've generally stepped into clients or situations or departments that are either broken or brand new. And so something about that transition I've always kind of been attracted to. And so my experience has kind of been around that. Spent 6.5 years at Walmart. And in that time, I had, I think, 4 different roles, technically. I was in 4 different departments. So started in internal audit, and they were in transition. I stepped into real estate group, and they were a little bit in transition. Moved into a shared services environment, which was relatively new in the way that they were doing it for Walmart at that time. And then lastly was in Sam's Club in this special project and rolling out kind of a new area of business from an accounting side of it. But in each of those instances, it was about collaborating across the operators or non-accountants or people in the business to either build better processes for them or to provide better information for them, right? And so within the real estate group, it was kind of building a better financial reporting package for them. And it was digging into systems and helping them understand processes and risks. And then moving into shared services, and that was really kind of my first experience with I'll call an internal client service of serving others and helping them. So what we found was through the standardization of processes and procedures, like taking a step back. So we were converting to SAP at Walmart at the time. So we had a homegrown system converting to SAP, which is not homegrown, and it's very expensive. So by doing that and taking the accounting function out of pieces of the business, so out of logistics and out of Sam's Club, and pulling it into a central environment of those things that needed to be more standardized, right? So what we had at that time was there's almost this lack of trust, right? I'm surrendering my accounting, I'm surrendering control to somebody else to do this. And so stepping from the business into that, I knew that because I heard the feedback from the people I worked with, and that there's this concept that this is just going to be this is going to be a self-service, not shared service. So I knew that communication aspect was significant in getting that confidence. And so when I stepped into that role in that shared services environment, what I clearly understood was getting trust and buy-in from those people that I served is critical for me to drive improvements in what they're doing, right? So we standardized, we did some different things, but with that team that I had, it was very clearly stating, this is the role that we play. And so we started meeting with those internal clients on a regular basis, at least monthly. And so by doing that, we very quickly turned a 55-hour-a-week job into about a 20-hour-a-week job where we were bored out of our minds, right? And so then we started, what I empowered the team to do was, well, let's start reaching out to other areas of shared services. And that was challenging. And it was challenging because people are protective of their space. They don't want to be told they're doing something wrong. So what we had to do was say, we've had some success, right? We've made some improvements, and we have time on our hands. We want to help. And all we want is a pat on the back and say thank you at the end of it. You don't even have to do that. We just want to help because we're bored. And some people bought into that and some didn't. And the ones that bought into it, truly, we saved them. There was the one specific instance where we saved them about 45 hours a month, this group. Well, 45 hours a month is significant, right, in our estimation. And there was other instances, there was more than that, that first one off the bat, because it was just a coding area. But they didn't have the right relationship with the right connections because it was a big environment to kind of get that done and done well. And we had experience with that. We had solved that problem in one of our areas. So we served them in that way and had some success, which led to some other things. And I would say that time was very much an eye-opening experience for me. And it kind of shaped a lot of my career after that. I ended up leaving Walmart and ended up in Charming Charlie. And at the time, they were about a $500 million business. They were growing tremendously, a women's accessory retailer company. They've since struggled, filed bankruptcy and other things. But at that time, they were just growing like crazy. And so they went quickly from 20 stores to about 280 stores in a period of about 5 years. So huge growth, huge issues, wrong processes, wrong people, wrong everything on the back end of it, kind of doing it. So when we stepped into that role as the assistant controller, and I was there for about a year and a half, just transition is what it was. But it was the same thing, it was advisory. How do we get the close down from 24 days to 5 days to 3 days? How do we transition to true accrual accounting, right? Those types of things. How do we provide better information back to the client? How do we get customer or vendors to stop calling us because we're not paying our bills on time, right? So how do we do all that? And so it's kind of this culture shift. And so I was able to apply a lot of that knowledge I learned from Walmart into this growing retailer, expanding hugely, and building kind of a structure to then transition to where we didn't have to have, at that time we had a team of 20 doing payroll, AP, and accounting. How do we grow this to become a $2 billion business without really growing the team? So it really became about standardizing the processes, getting some things down, and then again, at the same time, getting confidence in the people we're serving within the business. For a variety of reasons, I left there, right? And we just won't go there, but I left there, and I ended up back in public accounting, which was not my intent. It was supposed to be a placeholder to go to someplace else. But I ended up there, did audit, got some good experience at GT. Brand is a fantastic firm, right? But from my career path where I was going, I'm not an auditor, right? I understand risks, I do that well, I serve clients well, but really what drives me is that advisory piece of it. It's that client-based business. It's driving improvements in people and processes and systems. And that really is what I enjoy greatly and I do very well at. I ended up landing at Briggs Veselka, which is the largest headquartered firm in Houston, Texas. We're an independent firm. We're the third largest in the Southwest. We're growing, we're big, about 340 people, professionals across Houston, Austin, and some other smaller locations in Houston or in the Texas area. But it's a good sized firm. But what attracted me to them was their entrepreneurial mindset, right? We want to serve clients. We want to break down barriers. You know, our theme in the past has been legacy of loyalty because we've had clients for 20 years and that relationship keeps changing. And we do that and we do that well. But what I loved about that was we are small enough that I would have the freedom to build a practice, right? And then separately, we're big enough where we have kind of the ability to be funded to do that practice, right? And we're kind of in that transition phase because, as I mentioned, I'm attracted to companies that are in that transition phase. And so really we're moving to be more of a larger regional, and then we'll kind of see where we go from there. But the attraction was to come in, be myself, lead, and kind of grow this. Well, I was in audit for 2 years, transitioned to this advisory practice full-time. I did it part-time last year, full-time as of January of this year. And then specifically this CAS advisory practice, what I'd done last year was more around technical accounting and controls and processes. And we went into much larger companies that we normally serve and drove some pretty significant improvements, you know, for them and significant savings. There's not quite that full book of business that supported me completely with that, but there was an opportunity within this CAS area, client advisory services, There was some transition, and didn't have full-time leadership kind of directing it where we want to go. Sheila Enriquez is our managing partner, and she's very much a visionary within our firm and kind of where we're going with. So she's been in this role for about 2 years. And through conversations with her and kind of, figuring out where we want to do and where we want to go, and then specifically with me, career pathing, we're having a conversation, and it was a good conversation. And we got to a point of, there was this realization, and I didn't realize there was really this opening in CAS, but as we were talking, there was almost like a light bulb went off in her head. And she said, "Would you be interested in this?" I said, "Absolutely." Right? Because it's very much like that shared services environment. It's very much advisory. Maybe the clients are a little bit smaller, but that means there's even a greater need for those clients to be able to meet, right? And so all this experience I've had at Fortune 1 at the time, I think one at Walmart, right? And then a fast growing practice of business at Charming Charlie, where it was, you make a decision, you screw it up, you immediately fix it, right? You have to shift directions very quickly. And through my experience at Briggs Veselka, where I displayed some expertise around, lease accounting transitions and revenue recognition transitions and controls, kind of this residual stuff, it kind of combines all into this perfect environment of CAS, right? And so the practice had been around for about 3 years, and it kind of went up and kind of went down, but there was kind of this lack of strategy of where we're going to go. But the firm, Sheila specifically, saw it. I mean, there's firms we've seen that we have connections with who've been very successful at it, right? But it's a matter of just having that strategy. How are we going to do this? How are we going to move it forward? And having the right person in place. And I believe I'm the right person. I hope I'm the right person. I was put in this position, so we're going to kind of move this forward. But we've nearly doubled the business in this first 6 months of the year, or 8 months of the year, right? And a lot of that is building confidence in the people I work with in the firm. And then separately, having the right strategy kind of moving forward, and having the right partners. And then we partner with both Sage Intact and QBO. That's kind of that's the two that we primarily service. And so partnering with those guys, those people that support us, is helping kind of smooth us forward in that direction. So that's a very, maybe, I'm not sure if that's the summary you want, but that's the summary I got as far as kind of where I ended up where I'm at.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. What I've noticed over the last 6 to 12 months is outsourced accounting in larger accounting firms has been elevated to so much greater importance than it was over the last 4 or 5 years. And I think part of that is there was a lot of interest in moving legacy systems into the cloud, cloud accounting, technology, automation, and then along came pandemic in March, and that's sped up the impetus for anyone that was sitting on the fence and saying, I don't know, maybe we'll do this in a year. It's like, no, maybe we're going to do this week.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's really interesting and very fascinating too, to basically are running an internal CAS department within Walmart. It's just shared services, right?
It really, it's just another extension of the service. And I don't necessarily know that people think about CAS in that way, but it truly is what it is, right? Tax is our client. Audit to a certain degree is our client. And the client specifically is our client as well. So really it's the shared services of how do we get the right information back. And by connecting that, at least in my head, it makes it easier to understand and communicate to those people that need to know.
So given all of that in the time you've been at Briggs Veselka and the time that you've taken over the CAS practice, what do you feel is most important for somebody that's first stepping into this role? Either because I've seen a fair amount of small firms that are acquired into larger firms. I've seen a fair amount of people in your position where you're in one role in the firm and then shifting into doing this. What do you think is super important for that first 6, 12, 18 months for a new practice?
I think it's setting expectations and having a foundation, right? And that's kind of the baseline. So similar to my experience at Charming Charlie, where they were growing by leaps and bounds, you can only throw people at something for so long, right? You have to define the process. You have to foundation of combinations of systems and processes, and then the right people to manage that. So I think historically, as we look at the CAS practices, there was a lot of bookkeeping, right? So you have an individual, and even controllership services, sometimes it's an individual versus a task, right? But if you start breaking that down, really what it is I can only serve so many clients as a controller, right? And so, and I can only provide, if you just hire me as our controller, I'm one person. There is no segregation of duties. I am your controller, right? I have access to the books, the checkbook, everything. You're trusting me because I'm a good guy, right? But there's risk there. So it's having those processes set in place through a bill.com, through the different controls of QuickBooks. It's thinking about the risk perspective on how you can serve a client where it's not just an individual, right? So I'm happy that somebody wants to hire me as Kevin Stewart, but you're not hiring me as Kevin Stewart with Briggs Veselka. You're hiring the CAS team, and the team is going to support you. So somebody stepping into it, it's moving beyond the mindset of me as an individual, I have to do this. It's setting up the processes, setting up systems, processes, controls, so that you can support and advise, right? So because bookkeeping is bookkeeping, right? You don't have to be a CPA. You don't have to have tremendous expertise to be able to do debits and credits. But to interpret that data, that's really the value that we add. So I guess the combination of the two things is building the foundation, and then separately, focus on your expertise, right? It's focusing on that real advice and that real experience. And I think sometimes firms, big firms, small firms, they devalue the service. It's just bookkeeping. And it's not just bookkeeping, right? You can hire non-accountants to do those roles. I've got my first degree was political science and history, right? I went back and got my accounting degree. A couple of people that work on the team, they got finance or social science degrees, right? But they're able to think, they're able to serve, they're able to kind of do things or kind of dig in. All that say there's more to it than just bookkeeping. So have that mindset. There's real value to add. And even if you don't think you know as much as you should, you probably know more than that business owner, right? Because you're in this accounting world, you've seen multiple clients. And so don't devalue that. Don't devalue your services. Don't devalue your fees. Whatever your fees are, what people are willing to pay, that's the fee you need to charge, in addition to value services, but value service billing. But it's going into it knowing that you will have real expertise to provide, and it's more than just a commodity, right? So it's systems, process, foundation, and then valuing what you do, in my mind.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I'm sure I come from a professional services background as well, and used to getting the question from a potential client like, okay, we're on the fence between whether we're going to hire an internal employee or we're going to outsource to your firm. Walk me through the pros and cons. And it's exactly that. It's like, okay, you got one person with one static skill set, and unless that person is the magic unicorn or has like the equivalent of the 5-tool player in baseball, you're probably getting 3 or 4 out of the 10 things that you really need, and
sure.
It may be prohibitive to get 3 or 4 full-time people. Right. And yeah, there's a lot of benefits to doing that. But what's interesting, that a recurring theme that keeps coming up as well as using technology more effectively to get the bookkeeping component done faster to free up budget and resources to do more advisory work. It's like, is it just aspirational on the website that you're providing outsourced CFO services, and is it just really bookkeeping, or do you actually have those kinds of relationships where you're really adding value at that level? And it's very much a business strategy conversation. It probably has a lot to do with your client mix too.
It does, and I would say we're kind of in that transition mode, going from, I think traditionally we have been a bookkeeping practice, and so it's changing that mindset to serve more. But there are so many good tools. I mean, even Excel is a great tool to pull information in. I probably wouldn't recommend it from improving processes necessarily, but to do some basic analytics, a bill.com, which is a great partner for us, and we don't like touching people's cash, right? We want them to understand that we will tee it up, we'll get it ready for you. You push the button to approve it, to send it out. And we're going to be the control. We're going to do what we need to do. But through the use of Fathom or QVinci or any of those, you can get bill.com, even like the payroll providers of ADP or Gusto or those, right? There are a lot of tools in place. And really what you need somebody is to manage the process more so than actually do the functionality. So by setting up QBO right, or by setting up Sage Intacct right, a lot of those things are automatically coded if you set it up right. And then it's that expertise coming back in, is like, I'm looking at it. Are they kind of booked in the right place? Does it make sense based on historical activity or based on kind of what we know is coming in? And then digging as necessary versus just spending the hours and hours and hours of, keyboarding and typing stuff in. And so there are so many good tools out there, and so many things do have even Excel has artificial intelligence in it if you use it right, right? So it does, it's not aspirational. And I think AR is more part of our life within finance and accounting than we realize, right? And so so then you need that expertise to manage the process. When I was at Walmart, just telling a very quick story, and I apologize, I love stories, but there was an issue within cash reconciliations, and there was a lot of reconcilers in cash and a lot of people reconciling. And there ended up being an issue, right? It was a very large reconciling item that wasn't being identified and corrected. And so I got brought in to assist, and I came in and they'd been working on it for several months, couldn't figure it out. I got brought in and I approached it from a different way. We figured it out pretty quickly. But the point of the story really is when they set up that process worked perfectly if it was being operated well. And so they did a lot with people, they had some systems, whatever else. But as soon as they went off track, they didn't have the right skill set to fix it, right? So doing the process, doing the entries, doing the reconciliations, they could do that. But as soon as there was a challenge and as soon as it was broken, collectively they had no idea how to fix it at all. And so it was just needle in a haystack transaction, and we're talking about a massive account, tons of stuff flowing in and out, right? And so we got brought in to fix that. And so when I think about that, the process is important. If you can get the process set up right, and then what you put in place instead of is just somebody who's executing and doing, which I think sometimes as accountants we think we're just executing and doing, but really we need to have more of that analyst mindset, right? We're managing the process. We're not recording the entries. We're managing, we're analyzing, we're looking for areas of, if you think from the IT world, right, you have controls where, you connect the two places together, and if there's an error, it bounces back and saying, it was what came in, what went did not come in. So what's off? Well, that's a way to manage to ensure that there's completeness of that data. And I think in the same mindset as shared services or as CAS individuals, we should be approaching it in the same way, right? So as we set it up right, transactions are flowing in, and we should be looking for identifying, why is this not complete? What do I need to dig into, right? And if there's an error on one side of the financials, that means there's an error on another side of the financials. So what are the matching type things? And that requires a different skill set, right? That requires somebody with an analytical mind who can dive in and problem solve. And really I think in that CAS, it is changing that mindset. You can be profitable doing bookkeeping. To really add value and to really take it up in that level, you're freeing up your time to provide the real advice to clients, right? If you can get that transactional stuff just kind of captured, you're problem solving, you're kind of making sure it's flowing through, then you can focus your real attention on helping them drive their business and creating margin in their time, right? They have more time, creating margin in their financials, they have more profitability. And you're creating margin that they're getting real advice, and that's where the value is, right? Anybody can bill 150 bucks an hour. Is that worthwhile? Is it worth 200? Is it worth 3? I mean, whatever it is, you're getting to the point, you're breaking down the barriers through doing good work to give good advice to really drive their business. And that's really what we should be as problem solvers, helping them improve their business to be more profitable.
Was facilitating a workshop on outsourced accounting, the future of accounting technology last fall. And one of the participants, we were talking about staffing issues, and they were just kind of sharing best practices on the frustrations around recruiting on campus and new hires. And one of the things that came out was whether the new hires, new into the industry, were able to question when the AI was giving them information to know enough if it was not functioning properly. And the analogy we were coming up with at the time, it's like, okay, walk into a retail store, walk into a fast food restaurant, and when the registers have gone down, and see if the person there is capable of making change. And I guess this is kind of reinventing transforming the whole profession, where not only is it very focused on technology, but it's equally focused on the coding. The processing is very much the commoditized part of the business, and really where you can differentiate and make a difference is much higher up on the value chain.
I think that same struggle or that same transition is occurring within audit and other areas of the business as well, within internal audit, right? And having bots do the testing and then looking at the errors in the testing. Within specific auditing itself, there are a lot of technology tools with the AI. And so then when I was at Grant Thornton, there was a transition to a shared services environment in India where they supported us. right? So then the question becomes, all right, if they're doing cash and they're doing these other basic things you would think a brand new auditor would do, then what do we do with these brand new auditors? How are they getting experience? So there is value in getting into the detail and digging in and understanding. And I think there's a place for that, right? And by doing that, then they understand a little bit more completely. If you go back 30 years, and big eight or whatever it was from audit firms, it was binders and paper and lots of work, and it was 5 times the amount of effort. But I would say those guys, those partners who are now retiring or who have retired, they probably had a more in-depth knowledge of auditing and the process and financials than what we're able to get today, right? We have more tools and we kind of fall back on them. There's a lot of industries kind of going through the same thing. I think we're kind of there. So I do think there's value digging into the details, but yet it is a different skill set. And I'm not sure it's exactly a skill set that colleges and universities are teaching, but we value it when we see it, right? We value it in tax, we value it in audit, we value it in CAS. But I would think really from CAS, really what you're looking for is someone who's interested, right? They're inquisitive. They're wanting to learn more. And, they see things, and even if things aren't wrong, somebody who's asking questions, well, why is this way, right? And I would say my 20 years of experience, I've known a lot of answers, but I wanted to confirm them, so I play stupid, which isn't hard, right? But it's go in and ask the question, can you help me understand? And then whatever the question ends up being, and help kind of walk me through this. And by doing that, by somebody talking through the process, whether it be a client, a staff, a manager, a partner, whatever it is, it helps think through the process. And you kind of get to the point of, all right, help me understand. Well, something may be off or it may be right, but when you do that, it's a bigger picture. But that requires time. It's not just coding transactions and typing stuff in. It's taking a step back and it's thinking. And I think there's real value in taking that step back and thinking. So if you're doing and 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 doing, well, you're just doing. There's no thought process, so you're just doing. And so if you're doing it wrong, you're going to do it wrong. But you take a step back, and the way that we solved that cash problem at Walmart was taking a step back, big picture. What are some other things that look off? Where could there potentially be errors? Where could there potentially be duplicates? Where could there potentially be mistakes? And that's kind of where we dug down into. And very quickly, what took them months and months and months to not figure out, we were able to figure out and resolve to within a couple $1 million, which for Walmart was fantastic, within a period of 2 weeks. So I planned for it. I went on vacation. Team, do this, right? And they did it. They're texting me while I was on vacation. Hey, we solved another $5 million. We solved another $12 million. And it's like, that's fantastic. And I'm not even there, right? And they're doing it. And so it was very quickly resolved. And I think it really is the same thing here, right? Similar to the very first thing we talked about is we have more expertise than we realize, right? But some of that inquisitiveness, sometimes it's hard to teach. You either got it or you don't. But we encourage it, we push it. Why aren't you asking the right questions? And if I'm not being asking questions, then I'm questioning why aren't they asking me questions? Yeah. I can go on forever, but we only have a limited amount of time.
The thing I wanted to make sure that we got to today was, have you, in your role leading the CAS practice, have you inherited clients that have come over from other firms? And if so, if there's been anything that's kind of jumped out at you as cringeworthy, or where you just wish the best practices were in better shape across the industry?
We get a lot of brand new clients who've never been served before, but we have had a handful that, before the transition, that they've left to go to a well-established CAS practice, and they got over there and it wasn't exactly what they thought it was going to be, right? Either the customer service wasn't there, and there's a responsibility for the client, on doing some of that themselves, and there's a responsibility of the provider. I have no real horror stories, but I guess where I come back to is I think most businesses in this $0 to $10 to $15 million space or more are really underserved, and sometimes it's the best new clients are the ones that understand that they have a need, right? And you can educate and you can help understand that these are the things you need and this is the value, and this is when you should probably start engaging a bookkeeper or a controller or a CFO. And so it's that education process. There's only been a few instances where we've advised in different ways, and we looked at the bookkeeping as like, you're not really being taken care of, or it's been a fractional CFO that really is operating as a senior accountant, and they're borderline incompetence. There's a lot of great firms out there. There's a lot of great B2B CFOs out there and B2B controllers, but I do think it's very easy to put up a shingle and say, I'm a fractional controller, or I'm a fractional CFO. But what does that really mean? And going back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago, as far as when we provide a team of 3 to service clients versus a team of 1, right? And collectively, where there's 3, and I think in that, I put a billboard out there that 3 is less than 1, right? For the cost of 1 controller, our 3 people cost less than your 1, but you get more controls, better processes, whatever else kind of through that. Just doing something on your own, for me, I think puts that individual at risk, which then puts the business at risk. And so collectively, by having a firm like Briggs & Veselka, call me, by having a firm like Briggs & Veselka, it makes more sense, because you want to protect yourself. You want to make sure that your assets are what you think they are. You want to make sure that the cash in the bank is what you think it is. I had a client reach out to me recently, and they looked at last year, they looked at this year. Naturally, COVID has had an impact on everybody. It's had an impact on them. But in his mind, there's no reason why their financials, actually, they should have been in a better cash position. And they have a bookkeeper in-house, and he doesn't think there's anything nefarious going on, and hopefully there's not. But something was off, and he's not sure what. And he thought they actually should have been ahead because they got PPP funds, right? So they got another $100,000 in fees. So really their payroll was taken care of for that 8-week time period. But something's still off, and it's wrong. Well, they have 1 person doing those books. If they'd be using a Briggs & Veselka or somebody like us, then you would have a team of 3, and there would be an individual, and there would be somebody reviewing it, and they'd be producing some sort of financials or analytics or KPI tools, whatever else, and we'd be walking through the business owner with that and helping them understand. And so there's more of a process in that place that can allow a small business to have a very established, rigorous accounting and finance function to help them operate better as a company. And that could be at $24,000 a year, it could be $100,000 a year, but it's going to be less costly more times than not, and better quality, just because you've got more people putting eyes on it, right? And the more expertise, and that's kind of what we do. So that's kind of where I land, is that process matters, because that process naturally has controls in it and segregations of duties in it, which ensures better quality more times than not.
I've always seen with different categories of professional services, whether it's IT services or outsourced marketing services or management consulting, like the business owner is an expert at knowing how to hire and manage the kind of staff that's core to that business.
Right.
Are they really an expert at staffing an accounting department? Are they really an expert at staffing an IT department?
No.
This is where the outsourced ends.
Right.
This is where one of these things where the pandemic, I think, is going to accelerate the recognition that you got to pick your battles after a while.
Well, the other piece of it too is businesses, that business owner, the way that we shape it is, you are great at building your business. You know your clients, you know your product, you're great at it. I mean, you've built it to whatever it is, whatever that level is. Building a business is hard. So you have expertise on building a business. Why would you want to spend 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, whatever it is a month doing the accounting side of it, yeah. Right? And we're going to do the best we can to make that accounting small and the advice large. And so kind of getting to that side of, if you to your point, the right skill set for selling, the right skill set to hire the right engineer to build the product, the right production type stuff. The accounting, you hire an expert for everything else. Let's hire an expert to do that. And so that money is actually pretty well spent. One of the marketing tools that I've used is, calling myself a chief profit officer. I'm going to help you identify those areas of spend that you're not getting the bang for your buck, or where you're spending too much, where your cost of goods sold are often different. Maybe you're making more money in certain areas of the business than others. Maybe that high end cost you're not getting profit there, more of it's this middle level layer as well. And I think that expertise, looking at things in a different light, right? Being removed from it, being independent-ish, it can truly push that business forward and helping them understand, having more of a strategic view of their finances and the way they're building their business. And at the back end of that, there's acquisitions, there's exit strategies, all that type of stuff. And there is an importance of having that discipline at the beginning. Again, what a small company can have, that structure and discipline of a big company, and maybe better, by again outsourcing to somebody like us, because we're using the right tools, the right processes, the right people to kind of all that together to kind of move forward.
Final question I have for you is your prediction on what's going to be the one big thing that's going to completely reshape the entire client accounting services business model and its impact on the accounting industry, what do you think is going to be the big thing that we're going to look back 12, 18, 24 months from now and say, like, that was it?
COVID, right? maybe this environment of a lot of firms have been, I'll call them butts in seat firms, right? You want somebody on site. I think the last 5.5 months, people like us are privileged because we have jobs and we're able to work from home, work from anywhere, right? And some businesses, employees just aren't able to do that, right? You have to have people on the front lines. But for this type of work, I think it does dramatically shift us from, I need to have somebody on site all the time. I talked to a prospect recently, I guess about a month and a half ago, for a professional services firm. And they had a team of about 4 in their accounting. And they hired a controller right before all this happened, or replaced a controller right before all this happened. And then once this happened, the controller stepped out and said, I have to, for various reasons, I need to not work now. I need to take care of my family. And so they stepped away. And so in that process and talking with them, and they very clearly understood the power of outsourcing, right? But through that conversation, what evolved from that, I think what's happening with a lot of businesses across the US and the world, is what he said to me was, maybe there's a better use of those people within accounting, meaning that they've been here 5 or 10 years. They know the business. They know the clients. If I hire you, Briggs Veselka, Kevin Stewart, if we hire you and you can focus on that accounting analysis on the financial side, I can shift these 2 people, I don't know what those 2 people made, but whatever they're making, I can shift them over to help to drive the business because they know the business and know it well. So I think what the shifting of COVID is doing is, I think if there's not, there should be an evaluation of what is the right allocation of resources. And it doesn't necessarily mean firing people and cutting in resources. It's just what's the best use of people's time, right? So there's this term in accounting called the highest and best use, right? It comes when it comes to assets. What's the highest and best use of these assets? And I think with people in businesses right now, I think there is, first of all. And if they're not, there should be for those businesses that aren't thinking about what is the highest and best use of my resources. And so with that, there's an accounting piece of that shifts that mindset of whether hiring, I think more times than not, for a medium-sized business, you're probably spending $200,000 to $250,000 in people to support your business. And that would be a controller and maybe a couple transactional people that are supporting in a different way. If instead you hired a Briggs Veselka and kind of outsource that from a fractional side or support, that cost may be 60% of that, maybe-ish. That's kind of been our estimates. This is about 60 to 75% of the cost. And then shifting those other resources to something really driving the business forward. And you could take that down to a business owner who's doing the accounting themselves, and you're freeing up 10, 15, 20 hours a month for them to make another sell, to visit the client, to build a better product. So is that $5,000 a month? Is that if that's what they're paying us, right? If that's the amount that they're paying us that to free them up to make 2 more sales that are $30,000 a piece and profitability of whatever, does that make sense? And I do think this whole thing that we're going through now, I do think it shifts the whole mindset of outsourcing. And I think companies are outsourcing more than they realize, right? When they're working with a bank, in a lot of ways they're outsourcing their treasury function, right? When they're working with an attorney, they're outsourcing their legal function. When they're working with ADP, in a lot of ways they're outsourcing their payroll function, right? And then you have somebody managing that type thing. And I think this is just another step in this process to help business owner understand, am I allocating my resources right? I think that's kind of where I land. I do think this has been a horrible event, right? And thankfully it hasn't been quite as bad as the worst prognosticators are saying it's going to be. And yet in some ways it may be beneficial to all of us because it helps us collectively reevaluate where we are, what we're doing, how we serve, and then specifically within this accounting and finance function, we can serve differently and just as well, and maybe even better remotely as we can at home. So that's my story and I'm sticking to it.
Excellent. Yeah, you've shared a tremendous amount of valuable advice on how to look at where to allocate resources, the benefits of multiple people providing services as opposed to one person really understanding what's going on with the data, analyzing data, not getting stuck in the weeds, and really just rethinking what all of this means in the new world and the new economy and where everyone else is going to end up. Kevin, you've put out some great content, seen some articles and slides and videos. I know you're active on LinkedIn. Where would you recommend if somebody wants to follow you, learn more about what you're doing, ask any questions? Where's the best place?
Let's start off with, I mean, he can definitely reach me via email, but, starting on LinkedIn, and connecting, and I'll connect nearly with everyone, and the 300 recruiters I'm connected to kind of proves that. But the connect via LinkedIn, look at those articles and look at those pages, like them, whatever else, connect with me, and then reach out via message. Otherwise, the Briggs and Veselka website is out there, which is just Google Briggs and Veselka the CPAs, and then that'll pull up in Houston, Texas, and you'll be able to connect with me through there as well. But I'm happy to visit. I'm happy to talk. Just yesterday I talked with 2 other new friends from different firms who are building CABS practices as well. And so I'm happy, outside the Houston, probably even within the Houston market, I'm happy to talk with and understand and kind of problem solve together. And how do you do it? How do I do it? How do we do it? Kind of do it together to kind of work forward. Because I do think in some ways, it's one of the fastest growing practices for CPA firms. And there's a reason for that. I mean, beyond the money, right? And I think the money is attractive to kind of doing this. There's good margins in this and good money for this on a recurring basis, which everyone's looking for. The other piece of it too is really we're a feeder to tax and audit. And by partnering together, by being a full source provider, right? By being full and doing all those things together, I think it allows for a greater collective service of clients. And so it really is value add. But reach out to me via LinkedIn, reach out to me via the website, and I would love to engage in more conversations. But I appreciate your time. I appreciate you reaching out to me, Josh, and it's been fun.
Been a lot of fun as well. Thanks so much for sharing all your great wisdom over your career in public accounting and in retail and back into public accounting, and certainly gives a tremendous background and toolkit to be able to help small companies that don't have a lot of internal resources to be able to figure this out on their own.
Well, very good.
Thanks so much, Kevin. Stay well and be safe.
Will do.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the AI in Accounting podcast. To subscribe and leave a review, check us out at blog.vic.ai or wherever you like to consume podcast episodes, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and YouTube.